Hello everyone, I'm Mrs Collins. I'm going to be your head teacher from September. I'm really looking forward to seeing you all. I'm sorry I can't see you at the moment because obviously the school's looking very different at the moment, but I thought I'd read you a story, and I'm going to read you one of my favourite books, and it's called Mrs Armitage on Wheels. I don't know if any of you know it, but I love bicycles and I love this story. So here we go. Mrs Armitage was out on her bicycle. Breakspear the dog ran alongside. There he is, look. A hedgehog walked across the road. Tring, tring, went Mrs Armitage on the bell. What this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself, is a really loud horn. There she is with her bike. Mrs Armitage bought 3 horns. They were all very loud. Beep, beep, honk, honk, ba-hee-ha, went Mrs Armitage on her horns. Then the chain came off. By the time Mrs Armitage had got it on again, her hands were all black and greasy. What this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself, is somewhere to wash your hands. We're doing a lot of that at the moment, aren't we? So she got a bucket of water and a towel and a soap rack with a bar of soap, and she hung them all on the bike. And off she went with beautifully clean hands. What this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself as she cycled along, is to be looked after properly, and it needs a complete toolkit. So she got a toolbox with spanners and screwdrivers and hammers and cans of penetrating oil, and she fixed it to the back of the bicycle, and off she went. By now, Mrs Armitage was beginning to think about food. What this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself, is somewhere to carry a light snack. Good idea. So she got a tray for apples and bananas and cheese and tomato sandwiches, and a holder for a bottle of lemonade and a flask of cocoa, and a special basket for bones and dog biscuits for Breakspear. And she fixed them all to the bike, and off she went. Look at the bike now, it's getting a little bit overloaded. By now, poor Breakspear was feeling very tired, running along beside the bicycle. You could tell because his tongue was hanging out and he was panting. What this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself, is something for a faithful dog to ride on. So she got some iron brackets and some nuts and bolts and some cushions, and she made a seat for Breakspear. There he is, and off she went. They had stopped beside the road for some sandwiches and dog biscuits when it began to rain. Great heavens, said Mrs Armitage, what this bike needs, Breakspear, is something to keep the rain off. So she got 2 umbrellas, one large, one small, and she fixed them up on the bicycle, and off they went. Riding through the rain, Mrs Armitage began to feel rather downhearted. What this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself, is a bit of cheerful music. So she got a radio cassette player and a lot of cassettes and cheerful music and a mouth organ so she could join in, and she fixed them all to the bike, and off they went. Mrs Armitage was turning the pedal so fast and blowing the mouth organ so hard that soon she was nearly exhausted. Oh, what this bike needs, said Mrs Armitage to herself, is a bit of extra oomph. So she got some wood and some rope and a tarpaulin, and she rigged up a mast and a sail, and she added a few yards of bunting and an anchor into the bargain. Look at the bike now, it's looking amazing. And off they went with the wind behind them, faster and faster until, what do you think happened? Crash, crunch, clang, clatter, thud. Pa-hee-ha! Oh dear. Look at Mrs Armitage now. She doesn't look very good, does she? Oh, what this bike needs, Breakspear, said Mrs Armitage as she picked herself up from the wreckage, is taking to the dump. And there it is. She threw it in the dump. And what I need is... whoopee! Roller skates. I don't think that's a very good idea, do you? And what these roller skates need, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, what these roller skates need is... And that is the end. And maybe you've got some ideas about what the roller skates could have. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. It is one of my favourites, and I look forward to seeing you very soon when you start school with us.